They were hearty, humble, and held rural families together. Then they disappeared without a trace. What happened to the farmhouse suppers no one talks about anymore? Generations past never threw away bacon drippings. They poured it into a jar, kept it by the stove, and used it to flavor everything from green beans to cornbread. Why? Bacon grease added a smoky richness no oil or butter could match, stretching every bit of flavor and avoiding waste. It transformed bland boiled potatoes or dull cabbage into something downright craveable. Old cookbooks suggested adding a pinch of salt to keep it fresh longer. Over time, bacon grease fell out of fashion thanks to health fads and pre-made oils. But a spoonful is still magic in a skillet. If you cook bacon, don't toss those drippings. Strain and store them in a clean jar. Next time you fry eggs or greens, swirl in a bit for a taste of those old farmhouse kitchens where nothing was wasted and every savory drop counted. Trust the grandmas, bacon grease still deserves its spot. Long before food waste became a talking point, cookbook writers taught how to rescue tired produce. Wilted lettuce, limp celery, floppy carrots, none of it went to the bin. Instead, they soaked it in a bowl of ice water for an hour or two. The cold shock perked the veggies back to life, restoring crispness and even brightening the color. Why did it matter? Grocers weren't a daily stop, so making ingredients last was survival skill number one. Ice water was a miracle fix, giving you another day or two to use up tired greens. Nowadays, we often toss anything less than perfect, but you can bring back this thrifty, practical hack. Place sad herbs or veggies in ice water and watch them bounce back, just like those resourceful home cooks did. It's a small, satisfying act of rescue, and proof that old cookbook wisdom was ahead of its time in saving money and food. Toasting flour was once a prized skill in vintage kitchens. Cookbook authors swore by browning flour gently in a dry skillet before making gravy or a roux. Why? Toasting took away raw flavors and deepened the gravy's taste, adding a subtle nuttiness and rich color. Old cooks insisted you stir constantly to avoid scorching, but the payoff was worth the patience. Over time, pre-made gravy mixes and shortcuts replaced this step, and the trick vanished from everyday cooking. But you can still toast flour the old-fashioned way. Just heat it until golden and aromatic before whisking in your fat. The results are smoother, deeper, and far more satisfying than anything from a pouch. Try it next holiday dinner or pot roast night, and you'll see why grandmas were right to protect this method. Toasted flour might seem humble, but it's a tiny step that transforms the ordinary into something restaurant-worthy with very little effort. But don't put away your whisk yet, because the next vintage tricks will remind you just how clever old-school cooks really were. In many old cookbooks, you'd find a surprising note: add a pinch of salt to your coffee grounds before brewing. Why? A dash of salt tamed bitterness, smoothed harsh edges, and even softened hard water for a cleaner-tasting cup. For decades, camp cooks and farmhouse kitchens relied on this trick to make rough beans taste refined. It worked especially well with percolators, which could easily over-extract and turn coffee unpleasantly sharp. As drip coffee makers and pre-ground, highly engineered blends took over, salting grounds faded from popular knowledge. But try it again. Just a pinch, no more. And you'll notice how the flavor rounds out, tasting richer without masking coffee's character. Next time you brew an inexpensive or extra strong roast, reach for the salt like your great-grandma might have done. In one tiny sprinkle, you'll rediscover a classic fix that turned budget-friendly coffee into a smooth, comforting treat worthy of sharing around any old farmhouse table. Old cookbooks are full of tips to make crust tender, but vinegar in pie dough is a true grandmother's secret. Just a teaspoon of white or apple cider vinegar mixed into the ice water helped stop the gluten from toughening, leading to a flakier, more delicate crust. This gentle acid acted like a failsafe for home bakers working with unpredictable flour or hot summer kitchens. Over time, store-bought crusts and food processors replaced these careful, tested-by-hand methods. But vinegar still works wonders if you make pie crust from scratch. You'll notice how much easier the dough rolls out and how beautifully the layers separate when baked. It's an old-school trick that doesn't cost a penny more, yet saves frustration and waste. The next time you tackle a homemade pie, remember this vintage hack. It proves that a splash of vinegar is worth its weight in flakiness and a taste of true, old-fashioned pie magic. Which of these old cookbook tricks would you try first in your kitchen? Share your experiments and memories in the comments. We'd love to hear your stories. Blanching almonds was once second nature to home cooks. Old cookbooks advised boiling raw almonds for a minute, then plunging them in cold water so their skin slipped right off. This simple trick made almonds ready for candy, cakes, and marzipan. Why did it matter? Almond skins can turn bitter or gritty in delicate desserts, and blanching smoothed the taste beautifully. Before supermarkets sold bags of pre-peeled slivered almonds, families did this step themselves, often letting kids help pop the skins off. It was almost a game around the table. With modern convenience foods, this skill faded away, but you can still do it at home in 5 minutes, saving money and keeping flavor fresher. Next time you bake a torte or holiday almond cookies, try blanching your own. You'll feel that old-time kitchen pride and discover how one simple, almost forgotten step transforms nuts from harsh to heavenly, the way cookbooks once taught. But don't close that yellowed cookbook yet. More clever, money-saving tricks are about to unfold. In old cookbooks, you'd often find this no-waste miracle. Stale bread could be revived with a quick sprinkle of water. Cooks would lightly dampen a loaf's crust, then pop it into a hot oven for a few minutes. The steam refreshed the crumb, turning it soft again while crisping the outer crust beautifully. Back when daily bread deliveries were impractical, this trick meant no slice went to waste. Eventually, factory-fresh bread, preservatives, and plastic bags made the skill fade away. But it still works wonders today, especially for crusty artisan loaves that dry out quickly. Don't toss a day-old baguette. Splash it, heat it, and watch it spring back to life. It's satisfying, thrifty, and absolutely delicious, honoring a tradition of respecting every crumb. The next time you stand over a hard loaf, channel those wise, resourceful cookbook writers who knew how to bring bread back from the brink with nothing but water and gentle heat. A time-honored biscuit method taught by grandmothers and printed in countless cookbooks was to keep the butter cold and leave it in little chunks before cutting into the flour. Why? Those cold bits created pockets of steam as the biscuits baked, lifting them high and making them tender and flaky inside. Rushed or softened butter just blended in, losing that magic. Over time, refrigerated biscuits and quick mixes replaced these techniques, leaving the old method nearly forgotten. But you can bring it back. Freeze the butter briefly, then grate it into your flour before gently mixing. Watch how beautifully those biscuits rise, layered and golden. It's a trick that's simple but brilliant, proving that old-school cooks knew their chemistry even if they never called it that. Try it the next time you want to taste real, fluffy, from-scratch biscuits, and experience the cozy farmhouse flavors that generations of bakers perfected long before canned dough hit the shelves. Old cookbooks praised the power of potato water, the starchy leftover liquid from boiling potatoes. Instead of pouring it down the drain, they cooled it and used it in bread dough. Why? The starch helped feed the yeast, making loaves rise higher and turn out softer and moister. Plus, it added a subtle flavor that plain water couldn't match. In days when nothing was wasted, this small swap was a smart, frugal boost. As instant yeast and modern mixers took over, potato water got lost in the shuffle, but it deserves a second chance. Boil your spuds, save the water, and try it in your next loaf. You'll be amazed how tender and flavorful homemade bread can be. It's a nearly forgotten gem of kitchen thrift that connects you straight to the grandmas who turned a pot of potatoes into magic for Sunday dinner. Why toss gold down the drain when you can bake with it? But don't drop your rolling pin yet. Coming up next are more old-school tricks so clever you'll wonder why they ever disappeared. Old cookbooks reminded cooks to always rinse rice before cooking. Swishing it in cool water removed excess starch, which helped the grains stay separate and fluffy, rather than clumping into a gluey mess. In an era before polished, pre-rinsed rice hit grocery shelves, this step was second nature. Cooks often measured water by sight, then rinsed until it ran nearly clear, a tiny ritual of patience that delivered perfect texture. As boxed mixes and quick cooking rice replaced traditional methods, this simple practice faded. But rinsing rice still works wonders for your next pot of pilaf or stir-fry. It's quick, costs nothing, and elevates a humble grain into a restaurant-worthy side dish. Remember your grandmother's wisdom. Rinsed rice cooks more evenly and tastes lighter, honoring an old-school skill that put respect and care into every pot. It's a tiny, almost meditative pause that connects you to cooks who never settled for anything less than perfect. Which of these vintage kitchen habits would you revive first? Share your thoughts, tips, or family memories with us in the comments. In countless old cookbooks, you'll find the advice to sprinkle a bit of sugar into tomato sauce. Why? It balanced the acidity of canned or fresh tomatoes, mellowing their bite and highlighting their sweetness. Especially in years when tomato harvests ran tart, this trick saved dinner. Just a pinch, no more, was enough to transform bitter or metallic flavors into a harmonious sauce. Over time, factory-made spaghetti sauces replaced homemade pots, and cooks lost the habit of adjusting flavor on the fly. But sugar is still a time-tested way to create a smoother, richer tomato base. Next time your sauce tastes harsh, think of those resourceful home cooks who tasted, adjusted, and trusted their senses rather than measuring from a jar. A simple sprinkle of sugar can remind you why old-school recipes still outshine commercial blends, turning the everyday tomato into a masterpiece worthy of Sunday dinner at Grandma's table. Salt cod or bacalao was once a pantry staple found in many old cookbooks. It stored for months without refrigeration, but was rock hard and briny straight from the package. Cookbook writers taught to soak it for hours, sometimes days, changing the water repeatedly to remove excess salt and soften the fish. It was a skill that took planning, patience, and trust in tradition. When fresh fish became affordable and freezing more reliable, salt cod disappeared from most kitchens, along with its gentle soaking ritual. But reviving it can open a world of heritage dishes, like fish cakes or Portuguese stews. There's a quiet satisfaction in transforming something so tough and harsh into tender, flavorful fillets. Letting it soak and soften connects you to generations who knew how to coax the very best from humble ingredients, turning simple fish into a feast, one bowl of fresh water at a time. Old cookbooks never skip this advice. Roll lemons or oranges firmly on the countertop before slicing. Why? It broke down the inner segments, making the fruit yield more juice with less effort. In days when fresh citrus was precious and pricey, wasting even a drop was unthinkable. A good roll under the palm, just enough pressure to soften but not crush, meant every bit of juice came out easily. When bottled juices became commonplace, people forgot this tiny prep step, even though it still works beautifully. Try it next time you make lemonade or squeeze a lime for pie. Just a quick roll makes a surprising difference. It's one of those old-school tricks so small, yet so effective, you'll wonder why you ever skipped it. This humble sensory ritual honors the idea that a cook's hands, guided by memory and practice, are the best tools in the kitchen, no matter what gadgets come along. Here's a true vintage kitchen secret. Old cookbooks advised adding a teaspoon of raw rice to the salt shaker. Why? Rice grains absorb moisture, preventing the salt from clumping in humid kitchens. Before modern anti-caking agents and climate-controlled homes, this was vital, especially in coastal areas. Rice grains rattling in a shaker meant salt stayed free-flowing for sprinkling, no matter the weather. Over time, factory-treated salts replaced this homegrown fix. But the rice trick still works, beautifully and naturally. If you live somewhere damp, drop a pinch of dry rice in your salt today. It's safe, simple, and a nod to the thrifty cooks who refuse to waste even a grain. Plus, there's something wonderfully satisfying about hearing those tiny kernels rolling in the shaker. A gentle reminder of Grandma's table, where simple solutions ruled, and no fancy gadget was needed to keep dinner running smoothly. Before food processors, old cookbooks taught cooks to grate cold butter into their pastry flour. Using the coarse holes of a box grater, they quickly broke up the butter into tiny shreds, making it easier to work into a flaky crust without melting it by hand. This method was faster than cutting in big cubes and kept the dough tender. Modern shortcuts and store-bought crusts buried this skill, but it still works wonders if you make pie or biscuit dough from scratch. Freeze your butter for 10 minutes, then grate it right into the flour before gently tossing together. The shreds create perfect little layers of fat that steam apart in the oven, making pastry rise crisp and airy. It's an old trick that feels a bit like magic, connecting you to countless grandmas who coaxed flaky perfection from nothing more than a grater, cold butter, and a practiced, patient hand. But don't tuck away your flour sifter yet. More timeless tricks are waiting to remind you just how smart vintage cooks really were. Old cookbooks shared a thrifty, life-saving soup hack. If you oversalted a pot of soup or stew, drop in a peeled raw potato. The potato would soak up some of the excess salt while cooking, leaving the broth more balanced and less harsh. After about 20 minutes, you'd remove the potato and discard it. Why did it matter? In an era when food waste was unthinkable and starting over was costly, saving a batch of soup could mean saving dinner. Modern cooks might toss out a salty pot, but the potato fix still works today. It's not a miracle cure, but it can soften a heavy-handed sprinkle. Next time your ladle tastes a bit too briny, remember those practical cookbook writers who taught simple rescue methods for common mistakes. That humble potato could transform disappointment into a hearty, satisfying dish again, carrying forward a skill that proves waste was never part of their kitchen plan. Many vintage cookbooks taught home cooks to dust fish lightly with flour before frying. Why? The flour helped prevent sticking, encouraged a golden crust, and sealed in moisture. Especially in an era of well-worn cast-iron pans, this method guaranteed a beautiful piece of fish without tearing or crumbling. Sometimes cooks added a pinch of salt and pepper to the flour for extra flavor. Over time, breadcrumbs, batters, and non-stick pans took over, making this simple flour dusting nearly forgotten. But you can bring it back easily. Just dredge your fish lightly and shake off excess before frying. It's a no-fuss way to keep fish delicate yet delicious, honoring the practical knowledge of cooks who never wasted a drop of flavor. Try it with your next fish fry, and you'll see why the flour trick deserves a spot back in modern kitchens, where quick fixes have sometimes replaced simple, timeless skill. Before silicone liners and non-stick sprays, cookbook writers insisted on lining cake pans with wax paper. They traced the bottom of the pan onto the paper, cut the circle, and placed it under the batter to ensure cakes released perfectly. This small step made a huge difference. No torn layers, no stuck edges. It saved many birthday cakes from heartbreak when pans were imperfect or batter stuck stubbornly. As modern coatings and disposable bakeware took over, the wax paper ritual slipped away. But it still works wonders, especially for delicate sponge or chiffon cakes that stick easily. Bring it back next time you bake something precious. It's a small act of prevention that connects you to a long line of bakers who believed that taking a moment to line a pan was an act of love, and proof that a cake made from scratch deserved a gentle, caring finish every single time. But before you fold away Grandma's apron, get ready, because even more clever, thrifty secrets are bubbling up next. Nuts stored in old kitchen pantries could go soft or stale, especially before modern airtight packaging. Cookbook authors taught to revive them by tossing them into a warm oven for a few minutes. This toasting refreshed their crunch and brought out natural oils, making them taste brand new again. It also deepened their flavor, transforming a dull nut into a rich, aromatic snack or topping. Why did it matter? Nuts were expensive, so wasting even a handful was unthinkable. Toasting preserved their investment and brightened recipes from cookies to salads. Even today, you can revive tired nuts instead of tossing them, saving money and respecting what you have. Try warming them at 300 degrees for 5 to 10 minutes, watching carefully to prevent burning. That warm, nutty aroma is a gift from old cookbooks, a reminder that nothing needed to be wasted, and everything could be made delicious again with a little clever old-school know-how. Old cookbooks often suggested soaking sliced onions in cold water before adding them to salads or sandwiches. Why? The water helped remove some of the harsh sulfur compounds, leaving the onions milder, sweeter, and easier to digest. This simple step turned a sharp, pungent bite into a pleasant crunch. Before sweet onion varieties and pre-chopped convenience packs, this was essential to making raw onions palatable. Modern cooks skip it, forgetting how effective it can be. You just slice the onions thin, soak them for 10-15 minutes, then drain and pat dry. Next time you build a sandwich or toss a summer salad, give your onions this vintage treatment. You'll appreciate how mellow and crisp they become, honoring the patient, thoughtful tricks of earlier cooks who never settled for harsh flavors. It's another reason to celebrate the power of a simple bowl of cold water straight from those wise yellowed cookbook pages. Which of these classic kitchen secrets would you share with the next generation? Tell us in the comments. Let's bring these lost skills back together. Old cookbooks always reminded bakers to plump raisins before folding them into breads, cookies, or cakes. Dry, chewy raisins could burn or stay tough, but a quick soak in warm water or even a splash of rum, made them plump, tender, and juicy. This step ensured that baked treats came out moist and flavorful, with no hard, shriveled bits. It was a tiny act of patience that made a big difference, especially before commercially plumped baking raisins were common. Today, people often toss dry raisins straight from the box, forgetting how wonderfully a warm soak revives them. Try it next time. 5 or 10 minutes is enough to transform plain raisins into rich, flavorful gems. It's a small, charming ritual that connects you to grandmothers who believed even the simplest ingredient deserved care. And it guarantees those homemade oatmeal cookies or cinnamon rolls will taste as soft, sweet, and cozy as they did in vintage kitchens long ago. But don't put down your wooden spoon yet. More genius old-school tricks are simmering up next. Generations of cookbook writers taught this trick. When slicing apples for pies or salads, sprinkle them with lemon juice. The acid slowed the enzymatic browning, keeping the fruit looking fresh and appetizing. Before commercial anti-browning solutions, this simple method was gold, especially for picnic lunches or fancy holiday fruit salads. It worked beautifully on pears, too. Modern cooks sometimes forget the power of this one-ingredient solution, instead rushing or accepting that their fruit will turn brown. But lemon juice still works like magic today, natural, inexpensive, and easy. Next time you prep apples ahead, give them a bright, citrusy bath just like Grandma did. You'll marvel at how much more beautiful they stay, honoring that patient, mindful approach old cooks practiced. A fresh, colorful apple pie, ready for the oven and still glowing thanks to a squeeze of lemon, is pure proof that tiny steps matter. Old cookbooks and cooking teachers swore by this simple safety trick. Place a damp cloth or paper towel under your cutting board to keep it from sliding. Before rubberized grips or silicone mats, this was the surest way to prevent knife accidents. It stabilized the board so you could chop, slice, and dice confidently without worrying about slipping. Over time, fancy gadgets replaced this humble fix, but it's still the fastest, cheapest safety measure around. Just wet a cloth, wring it out, and place it flat under the board. You'll feel the difference immediately. Secure, steady, and ready to work. It's a tiny moment of wisdom straight from Grandma's kitchen, showing that safety doesn't have to be high-tech. The next time you prep onions, carrots, or herbs, remember that damp cloth and give a quiet nod to those patient, practical cooks who believed a steady surface was the first secret to good cooking. Vintage cookbooks insisted on resting pancake batter for 15 to 30 minutes before pouring it on a hot griddle. Why? Resting gave the flour time to fully hydrate, let gluten relax, and allowed baking powder to start bubbling, leading to lighter, fluffier pancakes. In a rush, many cooks skip this, but the difference is real. Those old Sunday morning kitchens smelled amazing, partly because the cook took that extra pause, letting batter work its quiet magic. Over time, instant mixes and pre-made batter made the tradition vanish, but it's worth bringing back. Whether for weekend pancakes or campfire flapjacks, a short rest is the secret to fluffy perfection. Next time you're tempted to cook right away, wait a few minutes and taste the difference. Resting the batter honors the rhythm of old-fashioned kitchens, where patience and a little pause made each breakfast a celebration of family, flavor, and good old-fashioned skill. Before fancy cake testers and toothpicks, old cookbook authors told bakers to use a simple drinking straw, or even a piece of spaghetti, to check if a cake was done. Slide it into the middle of the cake, pull it out, and see if it came out clean. If it did, the cake was ready. No guessing, no burned edges from leaving it too long. This quick, thrifty test saved countless birthday cakes from disaster and worked beautifully even in temperamental wood-fired ovens. Today, specialized cake testers have replaced this everyday fix, but a humble straw works just as well and costs nothing. Bring back this small, satisfying ritual next time you bake. Simple, smart, and grounded in generations of common sense. There's something special about trusting your eyes and hands rather than a fancy gadget, just like home cooks did for decades, proving sometimes the best tools are the ones you already have. Which of these charming old tricks would you love to pass down? Share your favorites in the comments below. We'd love to hear your stories. Old cookbooks taught a thrifty trick: save your butter or margarine wrappers. Even after the stick was gone, the paper held enough residue to grease cake pans, pie plates, or baking sheets. Why waste a clean brush or get greasy fingers when a leftover wrapper did the job perfectly? This small practice saved time, pennies, and dishes, and was second nature for generations of home cooks. Once non-stick sprays and disposable parchment took over, this smart habit faded away. But it's worth reviving. Waxed butter wrappers are still a free, natural way to keep baked goods from sticking. Next time you unwrap a stick of butter, fold up the paper, tuck it in the fridge, and remember the grandmothers who valued every scrap. It's a sweet little nod to an era when nothing went to waste, and even a humble wrapper helped create homemade treats, one pan at a time. Old cookbooks suggested slightly warming your mixing bowl before whipping egg whites. Why? Warm bowls helped stabilize the proteins and made them whip faster into soft, glossy peaks. This was especially useful in drafty kitchens where eggs stayed cold and stubborn. To warm the bowl, cooks ran it under hot water, dried it thoroughly, then began whisking. With electric mixers now doing all the work, this small temperature trick disappeared. But it still works if you want beautifully whipped whites for meringue or sponge cake. Try it. Your peaks will rise higher, faster, and with more structure. It's a quiet moment of kitchen science passed down by bakers who didn't need a degree to understand how simple heat could make all the difference. In a world of high-tech gadgets, a warm bowl still feels like a grandmother's gentle hug for your baking dreams, promising lighter cakes and perfect meringues every single time. Before those convenient yeast packets and rapid rise formulas, old cookbooks taught bakers to proof yeast. They sprinkled dry yeast into warm water with a pinch of sugar to check if it bubbled and foamed. If nothing happened, the yeast was dead, saving the heartbreak of a failed loaf hours later. This quick test built confidence and avoided wasting precious flour. Modern yeast is more reliable, but proofing remains a brilliant habit, especially for bread newbies or those using bulk yeast from a jar. It only takes 5 minutes and guarantees your dough will rise beautifully. There's something deeply satisfying about seeing those first foamy bubbles, a sign of life and hope in a humble bowl. It connects you to generations of patient, practical bakers who never left their bread's success to chance. Proofing yeast might seem old-fashioned, but it's a 5-minute insurance policy that every bread lover should still treasure. But before you store away the flour sack, a few final cookbook secrets are coming up that you won't want to miss. Cooks from decades ago preserved jams and jellies under a thin layer of melted paraffin wax. Poured over the hot jam, the wax sealed out air and bacteria before lids were tightened down. It was a simple, effective way to keep homemade preserves fresh in the days before modern canning lids became standard. The process looked dramatic, hot wax shimmering on top of bright strawberry or peach jam, and kids often watched wide-eyed as mothers carefully poured it. Though canning lids have replaced wax for safety reasons, the image of paraffin-topped jars still glows in many people's memories. While today you should follow modern safety canning methods, remembering this tradition honors the ingenuity of thrifty, determined home preservers. Their bright rows of jams and wax-sealed jars spoke of summers saved for winter, of sweetness made to last. It's a beautiful symbol of a time when nothing went to waste and everything was crafted with care. Here's a final forgotten gem. Old cookbooks advised sprinkling water lightly over fruit pies before baking. Why? The moisture helped the crust brown more evenly and kept the top from over-crisping before the filling bubbled through. Some bakers even flicked water from their fingertips, creating a ritual of sorts that felt almost magical. With modern ovens and pastry shields, this step was lost, but it still works wonderfully. Try it with your next apple or cherry pie, and you'll notice a beautifully golden, tender crust that doesn't dry out. It's a humble, loving tradition that reminds us how small acts, just a splash of water, can make food more beautiful. Vintage bakers never wasted a trick to protect their handiwork, and this tiny ritual carried pride, patience, and skill in every drop. Reclaiming it is a tribute to the bakers who turned simple pies into something worthy of a county fair blue ribbon. I hope you loved this journey through forgotten cookbook secrets. Let's keep their wisdom alive in cooking. Which trick was your favorite? Follow for more vintage stories and skills. Until next time.